Welcome to Banff Centre Talks. Today I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with award-winning Canadian writer André Alexis. In terms of critical success, 2015 was a monumental year for André. His novel 15 Dogs, about a pack of Torontonian canines imbued with human consciousness, dominated the award season, winning both the Giller Prize and the Rogers Writers' Trust Fiction Prize. I'm going to start by saying, you're 58 years old. You've been writing since you're 19. I know you've been a bookseller, but writing has been really the only occupation you've had, and as you said, ruining you for anything else. So when did you first realize you'd be devoting your life to writing as a vocation?
I wanted to early on because around the age of 12, I sort of thought it would be kind of interesting, but I wasn't very good at it for a very long time, and I'm a kind of slow learner. When I was 19, just before I went into Carleton, I thought, this is the time when I really want to be a writer. But what made me want to be a writer was my complete failure to describe a chest of drawers in my room. I thought about writing, and I thought, well, I think this is something that I could do. And for some reason, I dared myself to write an accurate description of a chest of drawers in my bedroom. And I wasn't able to, and it was incredibly frustrating. I did page after page I could have just said, look, it's a chest of drawers, but I was just trying so hard to do it. And in not succeeding in describing that chest of drawers, all of the possibilities of kind of like what it is to be a writer kind of like were there in their initial state. And so I would say, like, from that moment, which is like 18 or 19, that's actually really when I became a writer, through frustration.
I have read that you were incredibly influenced by the stories of your childhood in Trinidad. As a very young child, you wrote in your book, Beauty and Sadness, I had a near obsessive need to hear them over and over again. Can you tell us something about those stories?
Well, I was Trinidadian, so I was born in Trinidad in 1957. My parents moved away from Trinidad and left my sister and I in Trinidad for a while. And then I basically met my parents again in Ottawa in 1960 or 1961. And they were strangers to me. But what was not strange to me was the accent and the languages where I came from, which they happened to have. They were Trinidadian. And so hearing stories of, Nancy stories and monkey stories and stories of La Joblesse, the kind of scary stories that they told, were a real connection to Trinidad, which for years was still my home. And so I think for me, storytelling was a way to accommodate myself with Canada. Trinidad was still there in the stories, and so I felt more at ease in Canada, which was pretty strange compared to Trinidad, cold and weird.
So these stories, do you still feel their influence in your writing or in your emotional life?
Yes, in both. For me, the language of storytelling, the rhythm of it, is Trinidad, but it is also a kind of essential non-reality. I think for me, fiction is necessarily non-real, and I get that from those stories. My sense of what the world is divided between, the real and the non-real, and I need the non-real. But I need the non-real for a bunch of reasons. Also, just language, music, the way Trinidadians tell stories is not how I tell it, but it's part of the palette of sounds that's available to me. It's, for instance, if you were a composer of classical music and you listen to jazz and blues, your palette is different than if you didn't know those traditions. And so having the tradition of Caribbean storytelling doesn't mean that I want to reproduce Caribbean storytelling. It means that that's part of the palette, that's part of the sound system that I can use. And it's very important. It helps me to decide word to word, rhythm to rhythm, how I'll work.
I think, again, in Beauty and Sadness, you said that the stories created an unbearable tension that could be relieved only by hearing them, as if they came ever so close to revealing something essential. So I'm wondering if your fiction is born of a desire to reveal something essential.
No, it isn't. I have a problem with versions of the usefulness of fiction. I know that fiction is essential to us, just as I know that all the arts are essential to us. What I have trouble with is assigning a place to the arts. I accept that maybe they teach us something about reality. I accept that maybe they are useful in the world of the real, but I don't like myself to place them in a position where they're helpful for real life, or they're helpful for the outside world. There's something about their not being real, about there being almost a haven from the real, or a place where it's possible to see that the real is constantly in need of recreation. That's important to me.
I would like to ask you what you mean by this statement. For a writer, the world is an aesthetic proposition as much as it is a thing to touch.
Okay, I was probably drunk. I think what I meant is that I find, that I'm living in a time where experience is valued more than aesthetic pleasure, aesthetic experience, like your real life, that what has happened to you is valued more than the life of your imagination. And I think I wanted to say there that the aesthetic proposition, the reading of fiction, poetry, the enjoyment of literary worlds is as essential to the writer as any real experience. And I would dispute that the conveyance of real experience is the most important thing. It may be that I'm passing on my own aesthetic experience, and that might be the most valuable thing that I can do. That my lineage is Beckett, Tolstoy, Queneau, Proust, and to pass that on may be as important as that I'm an immigrant and that I suffered through this or I didn't suffer through that. I just feel that there's a little bit of an imbalance in our time towards the real, which maybe I value less than other people.
15 Dogs was deeply influenced by the French group Oulipo. Mm-hmm. Who are Oulipo, and what influence are they on you?
Okay, so the Oulipo is the Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle. It's a group formed by Raymond Queneau and Jean Lescure, and it was in 1961. They originally got together to see how it might be possible to combine literature with mathematics. And so the Oulipo, for me, had a lot to do with my friendship with Harry Matthews. And the thing about Harry, and the thing about Raymond Queneau as well, is that they are both God-obsessed in a way. I don't know if Harry would mind, but he once wrote to me to tell me that after a dinner, he had a long conversation with a pudgy Jesus who appeared at his dinner table, which story I still love, but it tells you that, Harry is mystical, and I really appreciate that aspect, that there is I guess we all know that there is a touch between the mathematical and the mystical. He embodies it, and that's why the Oulipo is kind of important to me, that there is a something beyond the dryness of the mathematical that goes somewhere else.
You do a little playing in 15 Dogs with poetry. Let's talk about poetry again for a minute. Tell me a bit about those 15 poems that are in the book.
Well, they come from Harry Matthews. So for me, 15 Dogs is about what it is to be human. But rather than talk directly about the human, I transfer a lot of our thinking to dogs. And so it's not necessary for me to, I mean, one of the things that's most amusing to me is people criticizing how I've made dogs think, as if there's someone who's human that knows how dogs think. But it wasn't important for me to accurately or not accurately talk about how dogs think, because I was after the human. But what I needed to do was to just displace the human into somewhere else, so that you as a reader and me as a writer could see it from an odd angle. And I knew from the start that I was thinking about how we think. When I talk about human consciousness, for me, it's really about, it's kind of Kantian. It's like we perceive time and place, we perceive dimensionality, those things. I wasn't interested in being original. I was interested in thinking, what are some of the characteristics of how we think as beings? And one of the things that we do as beings is the artistic. I suppose it would have been possible for me to have a dog that, with its paw painted, but I thought poetry was probably easier to represent in the novel. And so at some point I wondered, well, what would dog poetry be like? And I asked Harry Matthews if he had any suggestions as to what a dog poem might be. And it just so happened that the ULIPO, the Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, had come up with a version of poetry that came out of a question. The question was, is it possible to create a work of fiction, or a work of art, literary art, that is meaningful both to animals and to humans? And François Caradec came up with something called Poème pour un chien, which is poetry that is meaningful to dogs and to humans. And it's because in the poem, not obviously, but sort of hidden, is the name of the dog. I should probably just give an example. It's the easiest. Yes, at the end of the book is where it is. So Harry's version of it was for Elizabeth Barrett Browning's dog, Flush. So this poem, the dog will hear its own name, and it will be meaningful for Elizabeth Barrett or whoever's hearing it as well. So, my mistress never slights me when taking outdoor tea. She brings sweet cake for her sweet sake, rough luscious bones for me. Between rough and luscious, rough luscious is the name Flush, which is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's name. So in every poem, there is covertly hidden the name of a dog who will all of a sudden understand, in theory, that version of that moment of sound. And so I thought that was actually interesting, because I was talking about language, and I was talking about meaning, and I was talking about meaning across species in the poem, in the novel rather. And so those poems were perfect. They kind of exemplified cross-species meaning in a way.
And you have Prince, I believe, the dog who is the poet in the book.
Yes, he's a poet.
In Timothy Findley's book, Not Wanted on the Voyage, much of the story is told through the eyes of a blind cat named Mottle. And Findley not only studied his own cat, but he spent time crawling around with his eyes closed to imagine Mottle and to understand the cat's perspective. So how did you put yourself in the dog's experiential world? Did you run around High Park?
It's a good question, because my dog used to eat shit a lot. So that wouldn't be something I would be thinking of doing. What I had to do, though, is kind of imagine why a dog would eat shit. And it's because... So I was listening to the CBC, as one does, and at some point somebody was talking about dogs, and they were saying that if a dog walked into a room while you were having stew, its nose was so fine that it could discern the constituent parts of that stew. Cumin, carrots, peas, potatoes. It could tell you all the ingredients. And so in a way, it's resolving why a dog would eat something that is foul when you kind of imagine its super sensitivity to all the elements within it and being able to distinguish them, being able to tell. So, in thinking about Toronto, I thought about taste and smell, what Toronto smelled like. And so, you know, under bridges, it smells like urine. Over here, it smells like a dog park. Over there, it smells like Chinese food. I mean, taking the streetcar from Parkdale all the way to the beaches is to experience smell in a way that you don't normally let yourself do, and I had to. And so in becoming, or in trying to approximate, no, what's the best way of putting it? I wanted to make you feel that I was dog-like. I wasn't curious. I didn't need to do it accurately, but I needed to do it credibly. And the most important thing was to talk about the sense of smell and to catalog those smells and to convey to you the city as a ground for a riot of smells.
And
So yeah, I suppose I didn't go around doing what dogs do, but I kind of had to imagine it.
But you've spent quite a bit of time with dogs over the years.
You know, yes and no. I've been bitten. There's one moment that is probably the most important, and that is when I was writing my first novel. So it is kind of tied to the literary. My friend Alex Irwin, who ran a dog sledding business, needed to absent himself from Sharbot Lake, where he kept the dogs, for 3 or 4 months while he was getting married, having a child. And I was happy to have a place to write. And so I spent 3 or 4 months with 11 sled dogs. And it was intense because I was writing my first novel. And the first time you're doing something that you probably shouldn't do, like write a novel, it's like intense anyway, and then it's associated with my partners, the dogs, 11 of whom they're all dead now actually. But I knew that group of 11 dogs well because every morning I went out and I fed them, then I cleaned up the dog run, and then I would feed them again at night and then go to sleep. And so there was an intense sense of belonging with those dogs. I mean, I've told this story before, and it's very true for me that part of where 15 Dogs comes from what a pack might be and what a sense of belonging is. So I was there for 3 or 4 months, as I said, and I was alone and missing human company, but I was sort of like enjoying the company of the dog. Just they were part of my schedule, and they used to do something that was really significant for me and interesting. At 7 o'clock every night, they would start to howl, and it was like a way of saying, "Everybody's here, time to go to sleep." They'd howl, it would stop after 5 minutes, and they would go to sleep. And so after I'd been alone for a while, I started to wonder if I could howl like them, because I started to wonder, if they could tell that I was an interloper, or, distinguish my howling from theirs. And so one night when they were howling, I started as well. And they didn't seem to mind. They just kept on going and then stopped when they had to stop, and that was fine. And then I started to ask myself, again, I'd been alone for a while. I started to ask myself, well, who starts this howling? What's that about? I mean, could I start it? Or is it like the lead dog, or what is it? And so one day, and it was actually a really important day for me, one day, at around the time that they would start howling, I started it. I'd gotten used to it, and I started howling. And there was a bit of a pause, and then they all joined in. It was like, all right, fine, whatever. It's time anyway. And so we did. And there was just that moment where there was a pause, and then they all started in, which felt like a moment of acceptance. And that closeness, that sense of belonging, is really at the heart of the pack versus the individual, which is also at the heart of 15 Dogs. To be separated from that sense of belonging is a horrible, horrible thing to imagine. And that was at the heart of the novel, just having experienced that belonging, but then to lose it. How desolating must that be?
Yeah, there are very strong emotional scenes where the dogs are separated, and
Yes.
you truly feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you now if we can switch from dogs to gods with a small g.
Neither of which I know, by the way. I have no idea about that.
But what I find fascinating, you're an avowed agnostic, yet you introduce the idea of God or gods in so many of your works, including Pastoral, and in a different way, 15 Dogs. So why are you engaging with the concept of God so frequently in your fiction?
Oh, well, I'm a Catholic agnostic, meaning that I am an agnostic. I do believe that we are not equipped to answer the theological questions that we ask ourselves, but I come to that agnosticism having been a Catholic. I mean, I believe that if I was a Muslim agnostic or a Seventh-day Adventist agnostic, my agnosticism would be different because its nature would be different. So I started out as an altar boy, a believing Catholic. A priest had said when I was in grade 3 or 4 that the most important prayer that you could ask was for God to allow you to love him or her. They didn't say her then. Him more. And I would walk home praying for God to allow me to love him more. And when I was 9 or 10, the intensity of that wanting to love that being was really, really important. When I was 28, 26, 27, 28, I lost the sense of the necessity and the reality of that being whose love I was constantly asking for. And so I was left with complete doubt as to the existence of this creature, that or being that I'd asked to allow myself to love him more. But I still had the sense of love because, you know, when you're 10 or 11, you can hypnotize yourself into feelings of great ecstasy, which I suppose I had done. So having had the sense of that great ecstasy of belonging to God, just like, you know, the dog pack, belonging and loving, and a real desolation of losing that. I have both sides of the equation, which is why I'm a Catholic agnostic. I don't believe we can answer those questions, but I still have a notion of loving, of deep loving for that creature or that being or whatever it is. Is that anywhere near an answer to your question?
Yes, very much so. And it also seems to me you're very engaged in asking the questions. You're not
Yes.
looking for answers.
No, the question's more interesting to me. I feel like what fiction does, the reason that I resist thinking of it as being a handmaiden to reality is that it asks questions deeply in an interesting way, and that is a value as well.
This very significant year for you, the Rogers Award, the Giller, significant in terms of prizes.
Money.
So, why do you think 15 Dogs resonated so strongly with your peers, the jurists who bestowed the awards?
No
Do you
idea.
have a sense?
None whatsoever. I thought the novel I read last year was better. Nobody agrees. It's incredibly difficult to say because, of course, the process of writing a novel that is a failure is exactly the same as the process of writing a novel that is a success. So when people ask you, well, didn't you expect you were going to, well, how could I? No, I had no idea. I mean, I didn't do anything different. This is the 9th book that I've written, and all of them have been written in the same way. I've sat down, I've tried to be faithful to whatever's inside of me, And then I've hoped that somebody other than my mother would read it. But in this case, yes, a lot of people other than my mother have read it.
There's a strong element of what I would call serious play in your work. I laugh through I laugh at a great many parts in each of your works. From Lambton, Kent, which is a play about southwestern Ontario that had me in stitches, to 15 Dogs, you reveal a deep sense of humor. So do you think of yourself as a funny person?
That's so interesting. I'm a depressive. I'm totally a depressive, but I find my depression amusing. And so, yes, I'm funny to myself, and I find like all of the darkness that is within me incredibly amusing at times. So it's a difficult question. Yeah, I guess I'm funny, but what I'm funny about is my own kind of non-funniness. There's a kind of balance. So, difficult question to answer. I hope, by the way, that people laugh. I don't write with the sense that I want the reader to suffer because I have. I don't think there needs to be a kind of equivalence. I do feel that to go through the kind of intense questioning about the world and life and all that has to be relieved by humor, otherwise it's unbearable. But, a lot of my humor is situational. I don't start off trying to be funny. I think if I tried to be funny, I wouldn't succeed. Like, I would love to do like a theatrical sex comedy with slamming doors and whatnot, but I don't think I could.
You once met a great Canadian poet. I'm getting serious again now. You met P.K. Page.
I did.
And your experience elicited, to my mind, a remarkable response. You said, you felt the cost and the value of a life spent allowing the world to come through oneself in language and images. So I'm going to ask you what the costs are of that writer's life.
Well, okay. So I think it's the cost that any artist would acknowledge, which is that on some level you do have to make constant choices between the life and the art. I haven't always been as good a person as I would like to be. I have at times been more dedicated to what it is to write and to do my art to the deepest that I'm capable of. But I'm aware that there are times when there is a conflict between the performance at the deepest level of my art and living in an ideal way as I would like to. And so the cost is a constant awareness of either your failings on the human level or your failings on the aesthetic level. You are constantly made aware of the problematic in your life or the problematic in your work. And that can be devastating. And over a long life, as P.K. Page lived it, there is a kind of acceptance, I think, of the devastation, of the constant questioning and doubt, wanting to be a better person, wanting to be a better artist. And I think there's something deeply, deeply important in the acceptance of a necessary failure. I don't think you can be as a great human and a great artist. Maybe somebody is. Maybe Proust was a great guy, I don't know. But I have my doubts.
Well, if we look at the other side of that you felt the cost and the value of a life spent, aside from the value to us as readers, what is the value of that life?
The value is that you can come to a humility. You can come to an acceptance of imperfection, that in the practicing an art form and the kind of the successes or failures in the art form and the successes or failures in the life, there is the possibility of a humility which touches on the sacred, which touches on a kind of acceptance of one's place in whatever this frankly ridiculous thing is that we find ourselves in.
In this extraordinary novel, 15 Dogs, you've given us a God's eye view and a dog's eye view in order to illuminate the human conditions. I just want to congratulate you on this sublime work.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
Great.
Thank you, André Alexis.